Kind of always knew that I wanted to be a surrogate. When I met my husband in 2007 and we started dating, I told him right away that at some point in my life I want to be a surrogate, so you're gonna have to be cool with that.
Why? Like, what in you was like, I want to be a surrogate?
Well, I always knew I wanted to be a mom, and I just love the idea of having kids. I was always around kids growing up, and I thought, what an amazing gift to, once I'm done having my kids, give that to somebody who can't.
Michelle Underland shares her personal journey of becoming a surrogate, offering an insightful look into the process. Through her story, she helps dispel common misconceptions and educates us on the important topics often overlooked in the world of surrogacy.
It's probably the hardest, in my experience, the hardest part of the surrogate journey is prepping your body to carry a baby that you didn't conceive. So getting to give somebody else their baby is like a feeling that you just can't describe. It's like incredible.
Welcome back to Motivation Monday. March is National Surrogacy Awareness Month. And with that being said, we have a very special guest, Michelle Underland. She shares her journey of being a surrogate twice. And I asked her all the questions that I wanted to know. And a lot of people have a misconception of surrogacy or don't really know the process. So Michelle answers all those questions for you today. Stay tuned. All right, Michelle, welcome to Motivation Monday. How are we feeling?
I feel great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited that you're here and open to sharing your story. You're probably like, what are we talking about today? Surrogacy. I have a definition, and you could completely correct me if I'm wrong, but surrogacy, for those people that don't know, is when a woman carries and gives birth to a baby for another person and or couple.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
I feel like a lot of people know what surrogacy is, but they don't really know what it entails and what goes into it. So that's kind of why we have you here. You are an intake specialist with Golden Surrogacy, and you have been a surrogate twice.
I have.
Most people have never been a surrogate, and you have done it 2 times.
Yes.
So I'd love to hear your story and kind of how you grew up and your origin to this point on.
Yeah, for sure. So I was the oldest of 4 kids, and I was kind of always the helper, the caregiver. My personality is definitely helper. So, and my love language is gift giving. So I kind of always knew that I wanted to be a surrogate. When I met my husband in 2007 and we started dating, I told him right away that at some point in my life I want to be a surrogate. So you're going to have to be cool with that. He was like,
Why? Like, what in you was like, I want to be a surrogate?
well, I always knew I wanted to be a mom, and I just love the idea of having kids. I was always around kids growing up, and I thought, what an amazing gift to, once I'm done having my kids, give that to somebody who can't. So I thought about it for years and years and years, and then in 2011, we had our daughter, and one of the very first thoughts that I had when they put her on my chest was, aside from, holy cow, this is amazing, I have a baby, but I need to give this to somebody else. Like, I want somebody else to have this feeling.
Oh.
So once we were done having our kids, I was ready to help somebody else. In 2021, I started the paperwork process for my first surrogate journey. In 2022, we delivered a healthy baby girl. And then this last August, I delivered a healthy baby boy.
I feel like you're kind of underwhelming, or under delivering yourself. Carrying a baby for somebody else, that's huge. And that takes, I'm sure, a lot of time, a lot of commitment. And I'm sure there were times where you're like, I don't want to do this,
Yeah, it's a long process. It's a hurry up and wait. There's paperwork, there's record reviews, there's a psych evaluation, there is a medical clearance at an IVF clinic, lots of testing. Once everything looks good, there's a medication cycle. That sucks. It is injections every day for 8 to 10 weeks, on top of a bunch of other hormones. It's probably the hardest, in my experience, the hardest part of the surrogate journey is prepping your body to carry a baby that you didn't conceive. So Yeah, after the medication cycle and you get released from the IVF clinic, it's kind of like a normal pregnancy.
So, what was the first time you were a surrogate? What was your first experience? I mean, were you like,
Yeah.
OMG, what am I doing? Or were you like, nope, I'm ready?
No, I was ready. I was so ready. I don't think there was ever a time. The first half of my pregnancies are always terrible. Like, I'm always very sick, and it's not fun in any way. But
Yeah.
even with being so sick, like, it's such a beautiful experience and gift. I hope to do it one more time before I'm
Okay.
retired. um, but the first time we had a transfer at the end of October in 2021, one of the intended fathers flew out to California and met us there for it. He got to be in the room when the reproductive endocrinologist transferred the embryo. We got to watch everything on an ultrasound,
Mm.
exactly where the embryo got put, and then that next weekend, I actually flew out to Boston and got to stay with his family and meet the rest. They had a 2-year-old at the time,
Mm.
and meet his husband. And yeah, we flew back and forth throughout the pregnancy to visit each other. And they came for a gender reveal. One of my closest friends threw us a gender reveal party. So
Oh.
we all got to find out that it was a girl at the same time. And that was so fun. I thought for sure it was a boy because I was sick, but not as like super sick like I was with my girls. So I would have bet money
Huh.
that it was a boy, but it was not. And yeah, they flew in, or they drove in actually from Boston for the delivery, and we got to hang out for a while. And it was a fantastic delivery. She was 8 pounds, 6 ounces. She was the biggest baby I've ever delivered. And getting to give somebody else their baby is like a feeling that you just can't describe. It's like incredible.
I'm going to ask you a very vulnerable question. I hope
Shoot.
that you're willing for an open
Yes.
conversation because a lot of people are probably like, they probably have a lot of questions on surrogacy. I
Yeah.
mean, I know I have a few questions. One thing that keeps coming to mind is, a lot of mothers, and I've never had a baby, so I don't really know, but a lot of mothers say that they have this attachment to their child. As a surrogate, how do you not have that attachment to that child when you're not giving away, but you're kind of.
Yeah. That's probably the question I got asked the most throughout each surrogate journey is how could you give a baby away?
Yeah.
And genetically, the baby's not related to me at all. Um, that would be traditional surrogacy, which is where a surrogate uses her own egg. So I didn't have any genetic makeup in this embryo. It was an egg
Hmm.
donor and sperm from one of the dads. And it's like a really long babysitting job. Like
9 months.
yeah, a really long babysitting job. So, imagine like watching your friend's kids or a niece or nephew, and they kind of take forever to get home. They said midnight and it's 2:30 in the morning
You're
and
almost
you're
a year
like,
late.
yeah, get home and get this kid. And so by the time the pregnancy's, nearing the end, you're like, I just want to get this baby home and have my body back and
Wow.
sleep on my stomach again.
So is there not even a little bit of attachment?
No, honestly, I had a harder time at the end of my first journey, like saying goodbye to the intended parents because
Mm.
we had grown so close and had such a great relationship. I knew obviously when I wasn't pregnant, we weren't going to be as communicating as often as we were when I was pregnant. Um, I
Oh,
got
because they
to,
become friends,
yeah, oh, for
Yeah.
sure. And we still visit. Both of my intended parents and I still chat regularly. I get picture updates and video updates. I fly out yearly to see my first surrogate baby, and they came here this last summer because I was very, very pregnant and then freshly postpartum, so I wasn't flying anywhere.
So for you, you didn't feel that sense of attachment. Is that the case for everybody, or does it differ from surrogate to
You
surrogate?
know, I think hormones play a big part in that. Sometimes postpartum, you kind of just get like the baby blues, and you kind of wonder if you're missing a baby, your body, like biologically, your body expects a baby to be there. So I actually feel like I didn't deal with as much of that. I was pumping for each baby. So I felt like that was a really great transition out of, my body was still helping. And then, pumping is, if anyone has exclusively pumped, they know it's like not a fun task.
Wow, okay.
So once you're done with that, you're kind of just ready to move on with
Oh,
life. So I guess some
okay.
people could, there's a very small chance that some people could form an attachment, but that's one of the biggest reasons people go through a psych evaluation, is making sure that there are no warning signs that they're going to create an attachment to the pregnancy.
Oh, wow, okay.
Um, that's a pretty big part of psych, is to make sure that the surrogate is capable of not forming an attachment.
Is it common for people to be more attached, you know? Is it hard to find somebody that's gonna be like, "I will not be attached"?
That's one of the biggest things that we talk about in my position when we're onboarding surrogates, is to make sure that, that's not anything they're worried about. If it's ever a concern with someone, that I'm personally talking to that wants to be a surrogate, we, tell them it's probably not the best time to move forward, because if you go into it thinking you might, form some sort of attachment, you really don't know what's going to happen when all of the pregnancy hormones hit.
Yeah.
So it's not safe for anyone's mental health if a surrogate goes into it thinking that she might form some sort of attachment.
My job as a podcast host is to ask silly questions and hope people don't make fun of me, but I have to
You're
ask.
good.
What are some reasons people would look for a surrogate?
Yeah. So, most commonly, if you are with a partner that you can't naturally conceive with, if it's two dads or two moms, if you're a single parent by choice, if you're a single dad by choice, you can't go get, an egg donor and carry a baby yourself.
Mhm.
So a lot of single dads or gay dads need surrogates if they don't want to adopt, and if they want to have a baby that's genetically related to them. Um, Single moms by choice, it could be, or, two moms, could be multiple reasons. One, they can't carry a baby on their own for health issues. And health issues aren't always reproductive issues. There could be mental health issues or other factors that play into them just not being able to carry. Um, Heterosexual couples that have tried without success to get pregnant on their own also turn to surrogacy. Sometimes people come in with kids that they naturally conceived, and something happened and they weren't able to complete their family on their own. So
Hmm.
they look for a surrogate.
Well, thank you for answering my
Yeah.
questions. You mentioned earlier that there's two different types of surrogates. Can you go into that?
Yeah, gestational surrogacy and traditional surrogacy. So, gestational surrogacy is where the surrogate is carrying a baby that is not genetically related to her. And then traditional surrogacy is a lot less common, and that's when the surrogate uses her own egg.
Is that rare?
It's a lot more rare than gestational surrogacy. I feel like
Okay.
it's harder for surrogates to detach from the pregnancy if it's partially their baby.
Yeah.
So,
Huh.
yeah, it's not as common. It does still happen, but a lot of you have to find an agency too if you're going through an agency that does that, and there's a lot of agencies that don't.
So, what was your experience like? What was the feeling of giving birth and giving the baby? I know that you were talking about skin to skin. That's something
Yeah.
really important for mothers to have or fathers to have.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my friends tell me I'm crazy. Labor and delivery is my favorite part
What?
of every
That
single
scares me.
pregnancy. Oh my gosh.
That's like something I'm actually very nervous about is having kids. I don't want to say I don't want to have kids, but the birth process is a little terrifying.
Oh, it's my favorite. It's just,
What makes it your favorite?
it's just amazing. Like, you get to see what your body just worked on for the last 8.5 months.
Huh.
And the adrenaline rush that you get, getting to meet a whole human that literally just came out of your body, is incredible. Each delivery I had for surrogacy, the dads decided to do delayed cord clamping. So I delivered the baby. Baby was put on my stomach until one of the dads cut the cord. And then as soon as they cut the cord, they got to do skin to skin.
Why is skin to skin so important?
It helps regulate the body temperature for the baby. but also just bonding.
Hmm. So I had asked Stacy, who's wonderful. She's been on the podcast before. She's our news anchor at KYC. And I was like, you have to help me with questions. Like, I hope I get everything correct. And she had a really good question. Shout out Stacy. She was asking, like, what is the basically like, can the parents decide the way you give birth?
That's a matching point when
What is
you
matching point?
match with your intended parents. So, when you become a surrogate, you lay out all of the things and how you want your surrogate journey to look, how you want your relationship to look, how you want it to look after the baby's born. And intended parents come in with the same thing. They have an idea of what kind of communication they want through a pregnancy. Do they want to attend appointments? Do they want to form a relationship with the surrogate? Do
Can
they
they
want
say
to
like water birth or no? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of people don't do that. They can.
I've never heard of it either, but I just
Speaking from like an agency perspective, you have to find the right agency that is able to work with clinics and intended parents that are comfortable not being at a hospital with emergency care. You know, if the baby comes out not breathing, how are we going to handle that in a soft hot tub or bathtub in somebody's living room, you know?
Yeah.
Or if you do it at a birthing center, what kind of resources do they have for a baby if there's an emergency situation? Or for the surrogate, you know? My first surrogate delivery, her shoulders got stuck and it was very brief. The nurse team at Mayo here in town was incredible and so on top of it. We didn't really even know there was a problem until 15 nurses were in the room in 30 seconds and they pushed on my hips and out popped a baby.
wow.
So, you know, there are surrogates who are able to do natural, like home births or at a birthing center, but a lot of intended parents come into surrogacy wanting to eliminate all risks that are possible. So,
Because there's a huge like health risk for the surrogate themselves as well, right?
you know, there's a slightly increased risk for like IVF pregnancies than like normal pregnancies, but it's pretty much the average risk that you take getting
Gotcha.
pregnant.
So I know that you had said that you have 3 kids yourself. How do you go about telling them, "Hey, mommy's pregnant"? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So as soon as I signed up with the agency that I carry for, we started talking to our kids about it right away. Our youngest was only just over 2 when we started. So, you know, we couldn't really give her very specific things. It was very just simple for her. Like, mommy's going to go to a clinic and they're going to put a baby in my belly and we're going to grow it for different people. Kids are a lot more understanding
They're like,
than
"Ah, okay,
adults.
whatever."
Yeah, like
They're,
especially
like, playing
at
with
a
their
young
toys.
age.
Yeah.
Like they don't think twice about it. So when I got pregnant, she was almost 3 and when I started showing, she was, you know, talking to everybody and people would come up to us and be like, "Oh, are you so excited to be a big sister?" And she'd say, "That's not our baby."
I do want to ask about that. Like, if people are coming up to you and saying congratulations, or how do you respond?
You know, usually that's what it is. It's, "Oh, congratulations." I'm like, "Oh, thanks. It's not mine."
You'll
But
say it right away.
oh,
Like,
absolutely.
okay.
Yeah. Unless I get, sometimes you just get vibes from people. And if you know they're going to be weird about it, I just kind of let it ride. Like, "Oh,
Yeah.
thanks." You know, if you can just kind of get a vibe that someone's not going to.
Well, why do
It's-
people feel weird about it?
I just think it's a lack of understanding. You
Okay.
know, a lot of people don't understand that most surrogates are gestational carriers. They aren't getting pregnant and giving away their own baby. And it's something that surrogates go into super mentally prepared for.
Yeah.
And I think that there's just a lack of education around surrogacy. So sometimes people don't know how to react when you tell them it's not your baby. You know,
I'm trying to
especially
put my-
being a woman.
I'm trying to put myself in my perspective. I feel like I'd be like, oh, cool. You know, I don't know much about
Yeah.
surrogacy, but I feel like it's interesting. Well, what is the biggest misconception, do you think, with surrogacy?
Definitely that it's my baby.
Mm.
You know, that I'm just giving away my baby. But that's definitely, you know, not how it is. And for people that are traditional surrogates, they don't view it that way either.
Yeah.
It's still a gift that they're giving to a family. Um, so yeah, but most of the time when people would congratulate me or ask about it, I would say, "Oh, we're excited. It's actually not my baby. We're carrying it for someone else, but everyone's super excited about it." And
Hmm.
usually people are just like, "Oh, that's great."
I think it is beautiful because I'm imagining a family that is just like so desperate for children and can't do that on their own. And it's just like, well, there has to be a solution. You know what I mean?
Right.
I can't even imagine somebody looking at that and frowning against it because I feel like that's beautiful.
Yeah, and some people just not their thing, and that's fine.
I like how you said lack of understanding.
Yeah.
And what is the percentage? Because you said traditional, and I'm going to butcher it. How do I say it?
Gestational.
Gestational.
Yeah.
What is like the percentage of traditional surrogacy? I know that's probably
It's
going to be hard
low.
too.
Yeah, I don't have a specific number for sure, but it's pretty low. It's not very common.
So I just think it's kind of cool and fascinating that you always knew you wanted to be a surrogate. Do you feel like that's the case for most surrogates?
I think that sometimes it is. I definitely talk to a decent amount of women that come to me because they want to be a surrogate with our agency and say it's something they've always thought about or something they've thought about for years. But I talk to a lot of people too that are like, "Oh, I have a coworker who was a surrogate and it sounds like something I'd be interested in. So can you tell me more about it?"
Hmm.
So it's really a very broad spectrum of people that have wanted to do it forever and someone that heard about it last week. And what does this entail?
What is the feeling? Like you delivered the baby, you handed them or to the family.
Yeah.
Like how do you feel?
Like, awesome. Like, I don't know. And it's probably just the fact that I love to give gifts so much. Like, I don't know if you've ever worked really hard on like a great present for someone and you just can't wait to give it to them. And just that feeling when it was like actually as great as you thought it was, not like, sometimes you're really excited to give something to your kids and they're like, "Oh, thanks, mom."
It's like a shot to the heart.
Yeah, that's not the case with surrogacy. Like, these people can't even contain how excited they are to get their baby. And so when you hand it to them, it's just like totally magical. But then it's also fantastic because you don't have to take care of the baby. So
The hard job is
yeah,
done.
they go to their room. Both times that I've delivered here up at Mayo, the intended parents have had their own room because the baby is its own patient. So they get their room, I get my room.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the first time was kind of towards like the end of all of the COVID stuff. So baby was able to have two support people because baby was her own patient and I was able to have two. So my husband and one of my closest friends was there to photograph the entire thing. And both dads got to be there. And then at the end, they got to move across the hall to their own room. And they would come visit since I was pumping. They would come, the nurse would, come grab whatever milk I'd pumped. And we just kind of you get to just rest and kind of recover without worrying about anyone but yourself, which is nice.
Can I ask, and this might be personal, is there ever a case where parents are like, we're cutting contact?
Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of times it's talked about. A lot of times that's, like I said, a matching preference where there's some surrogates that want that, and when we talk to people, we kind of describe it as a transactional journey where they don't want a relationship. And some surrogates are that way too. Some surrogates just prefer to give this gift to someone and kind of move on.
Wow.
So it's a very personal preference. We've seen instances where relationships just didn't grow as organically as everyone had hoped during a journey and contact kind of disappears. At our agency, we really try fostering the idea that we're creating like lasting relationships for the surrogate and the intended parents. So it's something we try and avoid. Just, it's kind of hard to be in a very intimate relationship with somebody, growing a baby for them, and then giving birth and just cutting all contact.
Yeah. Can't even say bye to the mailman without shedding a tear. Like,
Right. Yeah. So, but that's of such a personal preference that some people prefer it that way. And we always tell people that there's a match for everybody. If that's your preference, like you'll find that we don't generally deal with those type of, transactional situations at the agency I work for. But, that's another part of my job is helping people find the best fit for them. And sometimes our agency isn't the best fit, and that's okay because at the end of the day, my job is to help people make families, and if it's not with us, it's okay.
is there like a because something that keeps popping up in my head, is there a contract or a written agreement? Because I feel like if I was a surrogate, and let's say I was like, you know what, yes, you could kind of see me and stuff like that during the pregnancy, but there's times when I don't want you. What if the parents are like every day coming over? Hey, can I check? Hey, can I check?
Yeah.
Is there some kind of agreement where you could be like, hey, we talked about this.
Yeah,
You said you wouldn't be visiting me 24 hours, you know?
for sure. Yeah. So I would say most of the time matches aren't local enough for that. So that's probably a good thing
Hmm.
for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But contact is something that's talked about. I It's hard to say that it's really like written in the contract, like you're not allowed to call me 5 times a day. But contact is something that is talked about when matching. There are agreements written up for both the surrogate and the intended parents, and with different attorneys so that there's no conflict of interest, making sure the surrogate is totally covered from everything from how compensation is laid out, what happens for early delivery, what happens after delivery, what you know so many things, what happens if the embryo splits and she's carrying twins or triplets.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even think about
Yeah.
that.
No, thank you.
Oh my gosh.
And
Yeah.
for the intended parents, what are their rights if the surrogate is, in contract with them and backs out? What happens if the surrogate is
Oh,
pregnant
wow.
and does something against doctor's orders or,
So this is all talked
is
about before.
drinking? Yeah. So there's tons of things, as a surrogate that you have to be very mindful of. One of the big things with surrogates is that there's usually a travel restriction that starts, towards the second trimester of pregnancy, where, for mine personally, I couldn't leave state lines after 32 weeks, and I couldn't be any more than 100 miles from my delivery hospital.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
so,
You don't even think about that stuff. I would have
yeah.
never thought that so much goes into surrogacy. You kind of say, okay, just having a baby for them. That's it. Like,
Oh,
wow,
there's
there's
so
so
much. Yeah.
much.
There's so much every step of the way. And, sometimes you don't really know until you start. I know that personally, even though I wanted to do it forever, I didn't really do a ton of research. I just kind of, you know, jumped in and figured it out as I went. With how active social media is these days, it's really easy for people to kind of hop into groups and, start collecting information and get an idea of how they want their journey to look. But yeah, it's mapped out every step of the way.
Can I ask you something? I'm
Mhm.
going to be very honest here. I think I'm a little bit selfish because 9 months out of my life, I feel like that's a lot. In the grand scheme of things, it might not seem, but, 9 months, I'm assuming after is like, let's give it a year and a half. You're kind of recovering
Yeah.
after pregnancy. You know, how do you feel? I know gift giving is your language, and you said that, your love language, but how do you feel okay knowing that, I'm giving up a year of my life too because you
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
it
And,
twice?
the process, sometimes it can be longer than that. It's definitely something that has had to be a family decision every time. Because, and in a way, it is very selfish of me for my family to be like, hey, guys, we have some really strict requirements that we have to, like this last summer was hard for my kids because we like couldn't go very far for camping trips. We
Yeah.
couldn't go out of state to visit family. They were kind of bored in Mankato all
Yeah.
summer. But it's something that really has to be a family decision, and it's a very large level of commitment. And more so when it's someone else's baby because there's so many, you can make personal decisions with your own pregnancy because it's your baby. if you want to take the risk and travel or go to a theme park, whatever you want to do, that's your choice. But when it's someone else's baby, you have to be mindful of
How they,
everything. Yeah, and how someone else feels. So, it's kind of hard, but that's definitely something that, you have to account for.
Worth the happiness, though.
Yes, absolutely.
So I know there's restrictions, obviously no drugs or alcohol, but can a family be like, hey, I don't want you doing this, eating that, like no sushi? I don't know if sushi's even allowed.
Sushi is not allowed, which is so sad.
Is it raw fish, right? That's what's not
Yeah.
allowed. Like, can a family say, hey, I don't want you eating this, doing that,
Yeah, so a lot of contracts are written up that the surrogate will follow doctor's orders on what's safe and recommended, which, is the most ideal, relaxed situation. But there's definitely people who have very specific preferences, and that's something that we account for. Like when I talk to surrogates, I ask them, are you willing to follow, specific requests if the intended parents have them? Usually they say, within reason, if the intended parents want them to take a certain prenatal vitamin or, make it a priority to go for a 30-minute walk 5 days of the week, things like that. But some of them are a lot more strict. Some of them only want you eating organic food. Some of them, you can't have your hair done. You can't go to a nail salon. So it's something that is talked about pre-match so that everybody's comfortable once you get there. But those things are definitely in some people's contracts that you just can't do it.
I have another silly question, and I'm going to take one for the team. I'm always curious. So, do you have to pay for a surrogate? Like, do you have to pay a surrogate to be a surrogate, or are there cases where they do it for free?
There are cases where they do it for free. That is an altruistic surrogate.
So many terms I'm learning today.
Yeah, so that is also not super common. Tell you right now, as much as I love the process, it is difficult.
I trust you.
Yeah, and so I don't think I would do it without compensation.
Yeah.
But everybody,
Sorry, not to ask you a hard-hitting question.
Yeah,
I'm
no.
just curious.
The most common is compensated surrogacy. Surrogates are generally allowed to pick their own compensation. Right now, the average for a first-time surrogate is between $45,000 and $60,000, and that's a base compensation. The intended parents are also responsible to pay for like travel that's related to the pregnancy, pregnancy-related bills during the medication cycle with the fertility clinic, and up until they're released to their OB, the intended parents generally pay out of pocket for all those appointments and medications. If the surrogate doesn't have surrogate-friendly insurance, the intended parents have to pay for insurance.
Okay.
They have to take out a life insurance policy. There's generally a monthly allowance that the surrogate gets for anything that's pregnancy-related. Lots of things. The average when we bring people in to be intended parents, I want to say we tell them it's an average of $155,000 minimum.
Gotcha. We talked a little bit about your reaction to giving birth. I'd love to hear kind of your experience from the parents. Like, what was their reaction when they finally saw the baby? I'm sure they were very grateful to you.
Yeah.
Kind of, what was that exchange like?
Gosh, just beautiful, like wonderful. The first one was it was a pretty fast labor. I went in to be induced. I don't want to say super fast because it wasn't super fast, but I would say it's an average. We went in and started getting induced around like 7 a.m. and we had her around 7 p.m. So
Wow.
I didn't have to push very long for her. So it was really just like a fast, like once we were there, they had no interest in watching front row. They kind of took a corner and cheered me on.
And be like this.
The second one was I pushed forever. The little guy was just not feeling it. He was
First one was
there.
a girl. Second one was a boy, correct?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes. So the second one,
he was warm. He was cozy.
yeah, he was sitting just right to where pushing wasn't really doing anything. I had I'm telling you, the nurse team on the OB floor at Mayo is incredible. Like, they killed it. They were pulling out all of the stops to try and help me get this baby out without having to go in for a C-section.
Did you say like 15 nurses were in there?
That was,
Or was that
so
the
the
first
first time, I'm probably exaggerating. I'm 15. But they called for an assist, and all these nurses just came flying in to help get the baby
Were
out.
you like, what is happening? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they were asking me to push different than what I was used to in the last 3 deliveries I had had, and I was like, this is a little odd, but, I was going with it. I just trust whatever they're telling me to do.
Wait, let me ask you. So your first 3 children, you had them first 3,
Yes.
correct? And then you were a surrogate twice, correct?
Yes.
So that was the order?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and it's usually recommended that you're done having your own kids before you're a surrogate, just because there are risks with any pregnancy, and, we would never want anyone to be a surrogate and not be finished with their own family and have, the option to naturally conceive taken during a surrogate journey, and then they can't complete their own family the way they wanted to.
What is one thing you feel like people should know about surrogacy?
That is such a beautiful thing, and, there are never enough surrogates for the amount of waiting intended parents. But with that being said, anybody that wants to be a surrogate also sometimes can't, because there's lots of qualifications that they have to meet to make sure that the pregnancy is safe and as minimal risk as possible. So,
Gotcha. And can we talk a little bit? So you probably don't have statistics on hand, but how many surrogates are there in America? Would you?
Oh my gosh.
I know that's a hard-hitting question. I probably should have asked you for that info.
Yeah, I should have came prepared for that.
Like, is it rare? Let's just talk about commonality. Is it rare?
I think it's becoming a lot more common.
Okay.
But, even, 20 years ago, there were surrogates. It's not a new thing. It's definitely becoming more common, with the help of social media being where it is now as opposed to where it was 20 years ago. There's, ads and stuff that might pop up, and people are kind of able to ask more questions and see something that they might not have seen, 20 years ago watching the news. So it's not uncommon.
Yeah.
But I definitely have zero idea how many surrogates
I know. I
are
asked you like you would know. Yeah. Is there a specific? I was thinking this question throughout this entire podcast. Is there a specific number of times you could be a surrogate? Like, you've hit 2.
Yes.
Is there like a restriction?
So not specifically being a surrogate, but the ASRM regulations are no more than 5 pregnancies, with the surrogate pregnancy being your 6th. So they say 6 pregnancies is the rule of thumb.
Why?
To decrease risks. With each pregnancy, your risks increase. Your uterus is kind of like a balloon that is getting blown up, and then it's deflating, and then it's getting blown up again, and it's deflating. It can only, realistically get blown up so many times before something could happen to it.
Okay.
So 6 is the rule of thumb. There's always exceptions to a rule. Sometimes clinics will budge on one if they're doing a sibling journey. And sometimes there's clinics that don't follow ethical standards, and that happens too, but we always advocate to use ethical agencies, ethical clinics that have the best interest of the surrogate and the intended parents at mind.
What is the biggest lesson you have learned throughout this whole process?
Gosh, that I have an amazing support system. Like, the people in my life really, you can't be a surrogate without a good support system, but like, my support system is
Top tier.
Killer. Yeah. From my family to my friends, my husband, my kids, they're all so incredible that I knew they were incredible before I was a surrogate, but really just pulling out all the stops for me to, help achieve this dream that I had to help other families become complete was amazing to see.
Another silly question. You know, I
Yeah.
can't not ask you. You know, we talked a little bit about the mother being attached to the child. Well, technically, no, not mother.
The surrogate,
Surrogate,
yeah.
I'm sorry. We talked a little bit about the surrogate being attached to the child, but do the kids of the surrogate ever get attached to the idea of the
You
child or
know,
anything like that? I know that might be a silly question.
no, I don't think it's silly because people were definitely concerned about, well, what are your kids going to think? Well, our kids started out knowing that this baby wasn't coming home with us. You know, it was a conversation every day. Our youngest, the last journey, in the first journey too, she'd kiss my tummy and she'd be like, "Oh, I just want to see the baby," or "I just want to play with the baby." And every time I'd be like, "Oh, I know, me too. But remember, when the baby comes out, it's
Okay.
going to somebody else's house. It's not our baby." And of course, there were times, our youngest just turned 6, so she was 5 for the majority of our last journey. There were times where she'd be like, "I wish the baby just came to our house." I'm like,
Mm.
"Well, you're our last baby, and we call her our forever baby. Like, you're the forever baby. No more babies at this house." And, it's never anything that we entertained with them. It was never an option that they seen as something that could happen.
Gotcha.
So they went into it with expectations, and the whole journey, we never gave them any reason to have any other expectations.
It's kind of the surrogate's job to walk the kids through and kind
Yeah.
of talk it out. Are you allowed to have children after being a surrogate?
Oh,
I'm sorry,
for
I don't know if
sure.
we talked about that.
Yeah. There's tons of people who go on to have more kids. Definitely all personal preference. Yeah, it's definitely a thing. But, then if it's something where they wanted to be a surrogate again, they would have to keep in mind the number of pregnancies that
Gotcha.
they would have.
Alrighty, we're wrapping up on time, but a question I love to ask every guest is, what is one piece of advice you would tell your younger self?
Oh, gosh.
Putting you on the spot.
Yeah. To make sure that I'm flexible, to kind of take things as they come, to not have a solid plan for anything in life, because I feel like sometimes having all of your eggs in one basket can be really disappointing, and just kind of taking things as they come.
Let loose a little bit in
Yeah.
life. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming
Of
on
course.
and for one being very, very open and sharing, because I think a lot of people have a misconception or misunderstanding about surrogacy. So I
Yeah.
think that you cleared everything up. So
Awesome.
thank you so much. It was so lovely meeting you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Of course.